This is a meeting of the House Defense and Veterans Affairs Committee. I'm Chairman John Yates, and this is just hopefully a fun day as to meet our important people in the military and let them meet us. And we did this earlier with our friend across the street, Commissioner Pete Wheeler. So I'll start off by letting these fellows introduce themselves and tell a little bit about it. If they got a military background, you can put that in. So I'll end up the thing of Vice Chairman here. You want to? I don't need a mic.
Well, I think they're taking.
Oh, they are. I better be careful. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Melvin Everson, Vice Chair, Defense and Veteran Affairs, 23-year retiree of military. Retired in 99, 2125th Garrison Support, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Served in Germany, Fort Stewart, Camp Shelby, Fort Bragg, Fort Lee, you name it. Just glad to be here. And thank you all so much. The ceremony this morning was just riveting. And as I was sharing with Representative Celia, the military means so much to me. Father, World War II veteran, brother, 103 Screaming Eagles, Vietnam. I have a niece that's currently in the Navy. She served in Iraq. I have a nephew that was in Iraq. I have a nephew also now serving in the Marine Corps. My uncle, Marine, World War II. So I am military up and down. Thank you all so much for what you do to protect us. It many times goes without saying from a lot of elected officials, but this morning reminded me once again how much I miss putting on that uniform and seeing those young people and that young lady that gave that heart-riveting rendition of the national anthem, posting of the colors, the best I have ever seen. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
My name is Matt Ramsey. I represent Peachtree City. I'm also one of Governor Perdue's floor leaders in the House, and I have not been in the military. My father served in Vietnam. Both of my grandfathers were Purple Heart recipients in World War II. I'm very proud to serve on this committee. I tried to, Chairman Yates, I don't know how much you Google, but I tried to Google to find, Chairman Yates, I'm sure y'all know, is the only World War II veteran serving in the House of Representatives. I tried to do some Google research to find out if there's any other in the entire country, and I couldn't find any. I don't know if you're aware of any, Mr. Chairman, but it is such an honor to serve on this committee under Chairman Yates, and I'm honored to hear from y'all today and get to spend some time with you. So thank you for coming down.
Thank you very much, Matt. This next one is Representative Tony Celia, who's our secretary of the committee.
Good morning. I also was very impressed at the ceremony earlier in the Capitol. I've never served in the military, but I was born in South America, and I saw how the military related to the whatever government was in power at the time, and I know why we have such a strong government here, because it's civil. The military is headed up by a civilian office, and the military do military things. They don't get involved with the national politics, and I commend you all for that. I commend you all also for your heroism. I always feel I'm around heroes every time I see a uniform, and I'm very proud of that. I live in District 136, which is my district over Middle Georgia, right near Warren Robins Air Force Base. I've been on Military Affairs Committee for 18 years, was chairman for 2 years. So I know what you do, appreciate what you do, and believe me, in our house, you're in our prayers every night. We thank you very much.
We have some more members who are not here. Representative Mike Glanton served in the military, and Representative, I believe Stacey Abrams, I believe she served in the military, and Thomas Smith, I don't think he did. Those are the other members, and Joe Hextall. He served. He didn't serve it. Did he? Did he serve?
Not certain.
Yeah. Joe Hextall. I was sorry that they didn't make it. Some of those said they was going to try to be here. And I mentioned the people that we have helping us here, and this nice lady here is Jennifer Blackaby. She looks after several committees up here and tells us how to punch this buttons here and whatever. And then over in my office is my assistant and secretary is Delane Roberts and Jenny Bass, if you need any help over there. And then we have Soha McClure, who's an intern with us right now. Interns come in and help us through the 40 days and 40 nights and whatever we have up here. And so we're proud of all of them. And then I'll tell you a little bit about mine. Somebody says, well, I already know all about you. I looked on the internet or whatever. My granddaughter in Texas did that one time. But as he said, I'm a last World War II veteran left in the legislature, and I don't dwell on that greatest generation because I look at those youngsters over there in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I said, well, at least in World War II, most of the time we knew where the front lines were, and that was pretty well helpful. I flew a Piper Cub at the front lines and flew across the English Channel on D+30 and fought all the way across Europe, adjusting artillery on the Nazis. And I signed up for the reserve, and the Korean War came along, and the 5 years went into 8 years, but I had enough kids by that time, I guess they didn't want me. I went in the Army as a private and came out a captain 3.5 years later. And I told the general a while ago, I said, if I still have my bars on, maybe I could have got better attendance today. Demanded it, instead of just invited you. But we're real pleased and honored today to have a good friend of mine, Senator John Douglas, who has kind of the same job over there. And I'll ask John to tell me what's his official committee over there. And anything else you want to say, John?
Well, I have to come back to the house to get my batteries recharged.
We trained him in the house now. Keep that in mind.
I spent 2 years in the house here. It seemed like 2 years.
Well, I don't know how to take that.
Yeah, it flew by just like 2 years normally do. But no, it's good. I'm just going to sit in today, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you letting me do that. I have the Veterans, Military, and Homeland Security Committee downstairs. And it's always good to be back with the House. And this lineup here, I'm impressed. I've never gotten a lineup like this in my committee. But I appreciate the chance to sit in with you all today.
Maybe when you get my age, they'll come around.
Age over beauty, right?
Yeah, I guess. We were pleased to have a good friend of all of us here today, Commissioner Pete Wheeler, and we had him over one day, and he told us all about what he does. And I think this is so important that we get to know each other better, because all of us are dedicated to help soldiers and veterans in any way we can. And I was going to mention after he tells us about it, speaks to us and tells us who you got with you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be with you, and I want to express my appreciation to all of you for all that you continue to do for the veterans of Georgia. I want to tell the National Guard how much we appreciate what they have continued to do to defend this country. And we want to make sure that when the members of the National Guard get back, that we get them all the benefits they're entitled to from the U.S. government and the state government. Working with the National Guard and John Lester, we intend to see that out and meet with those people, our people, and see that they get all the benefits to which they may be entitled. And we meet with them in different places like Fort Spirit, Fort Benning, and other places, and then maybe in the local
Thank you, sir.
I was been in the county, but I was a short time when I fell off a horse. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Well, I was none of us retired from the military, but my mother had 5 boys and 1 girl, and the girl was married to a former soldier, and all 5 of us were in the service in the Army. 4 of us were in World War II, 3 in combat. At the end of the war, 1 was in the hospital, and 1 had bailed out of a V-17 and was a prisoner for 4 months, and 1 was in the infantry, and he was a prisoner for 2 months. And I feel close to the National Guard because my 35th Infantry Division was Harry Truman's old outfit in World War I, and Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska National Guard, a regiment from each state. And I, as I say, I thought it was a pretty good division because General Patton picked it to be the spearhead across Europe with the 4th Armored Division. I got Patton's autograph at the end of the war, and just about a month before he died. And I thought he was a great guy. Somebody said, well, didn't he slap that soldier? And I said, well, I knew a few probably should have been slapped, but I never did do that. But so it's a good thing to be connected with because you got citizen soldiers, and that's our country, you know. So at this time, I want to mention 2 or 3 things just so that you know what some of the things we get involved in, everything. I hope all of you know about the National Museum up at United States Army up in Virginia, and I've been getting some stuff on that. We have a retired Major Griffin who has taken on himself to help rehabilitate veterans, and he's teaching them to fly fish. And through a few influences, I was able to get 200 fishing license one day, and they all went out in the Chattahoochee River, and it was catch and release, and the state was good enough to turn loose about 3,500 rainbow trouts that I'd like to have in my frying pan, but it was a great thing. And then we've tried to introduce these people to Mr. Wheeler also. And then we have a group who are teaching the kids, teaching the returning veterans about this when they have stress. And this fellow is a retired colonel, and he's got a place over in Carrollton. And I got set up a meeting with him with they call them the Warrior Family, and he has a place over in Carrollton. He tries to take care of veterans who have the stress and so forth. So I just want to tell you some of the things we're doing there. We've been fortunate to have some famous people up here. General Schwarzkopf visited us a couple of years ago, and we honored him. And then we had the former the former commander of the 3rd Division. But recently I got a nice letter from, I think it's General Kupalo, I believe his name is. And I had dinner with him and his wife, and he wrote me a letter and said, I'm so pleased to what you folks in the legislature have done for our soldiers and our returning soldiers, and he called it Georgia's division, the 3rd Division. And they were so famous throughout World War II, but he gave me a medal that said the Rock of the Marne, went back to the original fame for them, and they've stood like a rock at the Marne River. And he's invited me down to Camp Wheeler, and down there, excuse me, not Wheeler. That's where my son went. My brother went in the Army, and he's got. Well, I guess he's got 1 brigade, hadn't he, over in Fort Benning, and he's got 1 in Stewart, and he's in Stewart. So that's just a little bit of things that we've been keeping up with, and so at this time I'm just looking forward so much, as we all are, as you heard the group here, that we do anything we can to help you all in any way we can, and we just enjoyed the ceremony this morning, and we changed the meeting date of this so that y'all wouldn't have to come over here twice. But so I'll just start off with General William Terry Nesbitt, Adjutant General, and let you introduce all your folks and let them say anything they want, ask any questions, any way we can help. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it is an honor for us to be here, and thank you for arranging this. So it was right after our ceremony here at National Guard Day, Senator, that makes it easy to get all these guys and gals together and at one time. You know the challenges that we have because we're all going in so many different directions. But
What did you say?
Yeah. But we are extremely grateful for the support that we get from our legislature, both from the House and from the Senate, and that's due in no small part to this committee and the great Defense and Veterans Affairs and Homeland Security Committee over in the Senate. And so we do appreciate all that you do. And Captain Yates, we certainly do regard you as one of our heroes, one of the legacy. One of the people that represent the legacy of our Army and Air Force. As I tell General Hammond all the time, that the Air Force is a proud child of the Army. It's only 60 years old, and one of our younger children of our organization, but a great organization nonetheless.
Well, I was in field artillery. I was Army.
Right. Oh, I know. You weren't Army Air Corps. You were a field artillery officer that just happened to fly a little airplane all around the battlefield. But thanks to all of you for what you do, and certainly your generation, Mr. Chairman, was our greatest generation. But I can tell you, as you alluded to a while ago, we've got another great generation coming on. The young people that we have coming into our military today are our nation's finest, and they are doing a wonderful job, and they're all patriots, and I'm amazed at the patriotism I see, at the volunteerism and the desire to serve and to put service before self, and they are indeed a great generation as well. Commissioner Wheeler, thank you, Pete, for all that you do and all that your folks do for our guardsmen. The untiring efforts there to do just as you said, to see that our soldiers and airmen get what they deserve and what they have entitled to them, and we do appreciate all that you do for us. I'm not going to talk much this morning. I just want to introduce our key leaders of the Georgia National Guard and give each one of them an opportunity to come up and speak to you all, except for Mike, and Mike talks to you all the time, so we'll bypass him. But Mike Fowler is my deputy there in the office of the Adjutant General, and during the session he's over here every day, so I know y'all see him and talk to him all the time, or at least he tells us that's where he is anyway.
Well, if one of you could tell us kind of what the situation is as far as the soldiers in Afghanistan and
okay.
Any other place that you
okay, well, we'll
kind of
sure.
brief us and bring us up to date.
We will. General Hammond and General Britt will tell you about what they've got going on now in regard to the mobilizations and where their folks are and that type of thing. We'll be happy to talk to you. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have in general about the situation in Afghanistan and Iraq. We try to keep our pulse on that. It is, as you know, we're over the next 19 months. The plan is to build down in Iraq, leaving a force of about 50,000 or so there, down from the 180 or so thousand that we have there now. And during that same period of time, we'll see a build-up in Afghanistan. I don't think we'll be able to build up over 19 months as quickly as we're building down in Iraq, because the infrastructure in Afghanistan is just not there to support a large build-up over a short period of time. And so there'll be a lot of effort going into to building the infrastructure there. And I think it's undetermined as yet as to how much of a surge we'll put into Afghanistan and how big that force will ultimately get. But we do know that there's about 17,000 currently planned increase in Afghanistan. The 48th Brigade, by the way, is not part of that increase. They've been planned to go prior to the surge, and so they're going over there. And General Britt will tell you a little bit about the mission that they're going to be doing. But it's a very dynamic situation. Just because we're reducing dramatically our forces in Iraq does not mean that that the war on terrorism is anywhere close to being over. We still got a long way to go. It's going to be a long war, and we are committed. The Guard is committed as a part of the nation's military to see it through.
How much is it hurt you that the Russians have put pressure on the country that's going to close down our air base over there?
It certainly will hurt if, in fact, that air base does ultimately close. I'm not convinced that it will. I think that there's a lot of politics in that. But we're looking at a lot of other alternatives. General Petraeus has been spending a lot of time in the area over there, visiting all of the countries around in that area and looking for alternatives, including negotiations with the Russians. But there are other avenues. And in fact, the new administration is even looking into opening up communications with Iran, and looking at possible that'd be a delicate political balance there if we strike some kind of a deal to get a supply route through Iran. But there's a lot of motivation on the part of the Iranians because they're enemies with the Taliban and Al Qaeda as much as we are. I don't know. It's kind of like making a deal with the devil, I guess. But we're looking. We're not. I don't think that our administration, that our military is leaving any stone unturned. The instability in Pakistan, the issues we have with the Russians, all of that plays very heavily in our ability to execute the war in Afghanistan because, as you know, it is landlocked and it's surrounded by other nations that we would have to have the cooperation with in order to supply it adequately to have that large force that we're going to have there. So. A lot of stuff going on. I can tell you that if that air base does in fact close, it will impact the situation there. If the situation in Pakistan continues as it looks like it will, the instability there, that will impact the war. And so we're going to have to open up new avenues from somewhere. And I think that the current administration is looking at a lot of areas in order to do that. But we will. In the end, we will come up with a plan, and I think that we will have more than one, so that if we lose one supply route through there, that we'll have another one to back it up. So I think that they're exploring a lot of areas to do that. Okay, let me introduce these folks and let them talk to you, and then we'll stay around and answer questions as long as you'd like. Major General Scott Hammond's commander of our Air National Guard. Brigadier General Maria Britt, commander of the Army National Guard. Major General Larry Ross is director of our Joint Staff. These folks provide the units and the soldiers and airmen to do both of our missions. The warfighting mission, where we provide soldiers, we provide units to the combatant commanders to execute the war fight, but they also provide units in our Homeland Defense mission to protect the citizens of Georgia and to respond to emergencies and that type of thing. They are the force providers. General Ross is the person who manages that on the Homeland front. He's the guy that commands Joint Task Force Georgia, as we call it. That's our joint task force that plans for and executes emergency operations anytime that we need to do it. And so General Ross will talk to you about some of the things that we're doing there in that regard in preparations to defend Georgia and defend the homeland. And then Brigadier General Jerry Bradford's our new commander of the State Defense Force, and great organization of volunteers that are out there practically every day doing something for the good of our citizens. And so Jerry will tell you a little bit about what the State Defense Force has going. So with that, I'm going to let them get up here and talk, starting with General Hammond, and we'll just go down the line here, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, General Nesbitt and Chairman Yates and the committee. We are really delighted to be here and share with you quick snapshot of your Air National Guard, your Army National Guard, and your State Defense Force. Our plan was, we huddled up for a few minutes before coming here. We'll just give you a very quick overview, service-by-service component of what's going on, and then after that we'll be available for questions and answers. Real quick background, since you all shared background, I'll tell you where my background is from. I come from a lineage of military people going all the way back to George McClellan. I'm a direct descendant of George McClellan, who had the distinction of of being fired not once but twice by Lincoln for failure to perform in the Army of Potomac. So that's really the only way that I can survive in Georgia, is by pointing out that my great-great-great-grandfather's ineffectuality helped the Southern cause for a while. My grandfather, J.J. McClellan, was a Croix de Guerre winner in Verdun, World War I, the French equivalent of a Medal of Honor. An uncle was a Purple Heart recipient, wounded in the Battle of Bulge. Another uncle was a Navy Cross winner, Battle of Leyte Gulf, flying SBDs. My father was a multiple MiG killer in the Korean War. So I was raised to do this, and it is certainly my honor to represent the Air National Guard and the airmen that we have in Georgia. It's all a good news story. I am very, very proud, Chairman Yates, to report to you the overall strength of your Air National Guard. You mentioned that you flew a Piper Cub 1,000,000 years ago. I've got a 1946 J3 Cub, and you and I are going flying now that the weather's turned good. I'd love to get a photograph of that. Air National Guard around the state of Georgia, we have 2 flying wings and a total of 9 geographically separated units located primarily outside of the Atlanta area, with the exception of a 100-man combat comm squadron at Dobbins. The rest of the Air National Guard is spread around the state. We fly 17 aircraft E-8J stars at Warner Robins in a blended wing. It's the only combined active duty Air National Guard unit that is truly blended in the country right now. In addition to that, we have 8 C-130s that we fly in Savannah, 165th Airlift Wing. Those are our 2 primary flying operations. And then the remainder are geographically separated units that are spread primarily in the Savannah, Brunswick area. And in addition, we have a newly instituted intel squadron that has just been stood up at Fort Gordon over in the Augusta area. Overall Air National Guard strength, we're authorized 2,907 airmen. We have 2,780 assigned as of last month, and then I just received a report yesterday that that's up again. It's been a good news story in terms of recruiting. 2 or 3 years ago, it was a bad news story. The Air National Guard in Georgia, at its low point, fell to around 84% of overall authorized strength. It was of great concern to us. Full court recruiting effort over the last 2.5 years has turned that around. In addition, I'm pleased to report that the state of Georgia Air National Guard is #1 for retention in 2008-2009 in the country, which I think speaks extremely well of our commanders throughout the state for the job that they're doing to retain our valuable, highly trained airmen. As a result of the recruiting and retention combined, we're now over 96% of authorized strength. Maria will brief you that the Army National Guard is well over strength. We don't have the opportunity to do that. On the Air National Guard side, we can only recruit to the positions that we have with a very tiny overage allowed. So it's a constant struggle for us to stay close to 100%, but we are certainly able to do that now. Real quick look at the deployment and ops tempo. I know that you were asking about that, Chairman Yates, and give you an idea of how busy we have been. Every single one of our units has deployed since 2001 in one way, shape, or form. We used to always say everyone but the band, but even the band has gone now. This is a full court effort, certainly the War on Terror. You don't hear nearly as much from the Air National Guard, and the primary reason is because we deploy with much smaller groups and for shorter periods of time. It doesn't make the news like the 48th Brigade when they go out the door, but at any given point in time, between 5 and 10% of our Air National Guard is deployed overseas, engaged in the War on Terror. Typically, they go for 2 to 4 months at a time, and so It doesn't represent the single force commitment that the 48th, for example, has to face with deploying soldiers for an entire year. But the trade-off is they have to go on much more frequent basis. And our typical airman rotation schedule, although it averages out to roughly that 1 in 4, it's not 1 year gone and 4 years back. Instead, it's out the door for a couple of months, back for a few months, and then back out the door again. We have airmen that have deployed 8, 10, 12 times over in theater since 2001, for example. Our J-STARS unit is a one-of-a-kind unit down at Robbins, and we have roughly 1/3 of our aircraft deployed overseas to support the war on terror at any single point in time. When General Nesbitt and I went to Washington last week to talk to Congress, our congressional representatives in Georgia, he pointed out that our J-STARS unit over in theater just went over the 50,000-hour flying mark. Do the math, that's roughly 6 continual years if you were to take off in an airplane right now and fly constantly. We have an almost constant presence overhead of Iraq and Afghanistan with that aircraft. Our C-130 unit mobilized for a 2-year period several years ago, and now instead of mobilizing with the steady state that we have over in Iraq, our normal ops tempo for our C-130 unit is to do what's called rainbowing. Instead of taking our whole unit and sending it out of the state, which is a big effort for the unit, and it's also a handicap for the governor because then he doesn't have that organization available to him in times of a state crisis. What we do now is we try to send 2 aircraft at a time over in what's called rainbowing, where we'll pair up with 2 or 3 other states that also send 2 aircraft at a time. That way we have to do more deploying, but we do it with a smaller part of the wing, and the rest of the wing is back here to support the state warfight. In addition to our aircraft, our much smaller geographically separated units in some ways are more on a pointy end of the spear than even our flying units. Virtually every one of our GSUs, as I've mentioned, have deployed. They're primarily comm-centric units. The 224th Combat Joint Communications Comm Squadron down in the Brunswick area deployed for 1 year into Afghanistan immediately after 9/11. They went for a year, came back for 1 month, and then immediately went for another year back over to Iraq. These guys go in, they're first in order to set up communication links before even the command staff from the Army and the Air and the Marines and Navy move into theater. And their business is up again. We have roughly 25 of those people that have just deployed again, and this time they've gone back to Afghanistan, and you can imagine why. As we're starting to build up in Afghanistan, these guys are first in now to some of those areas over there in order to start prepping the battlefield for the folks that will be rolling in behind with the surge that will be going on over in Afghanistan. We have, as I mentioned before, the 139th Intel Squadron over at Fort Gordon. It's a highly classified unit mission that they do, but I'm here to report to you that they are engaged daily in very, very meaningful war on terror activity. Though they're not deploying, they are in every way, shape, and form of frontline fighters in terms of what they are doing on a daily basis over there. Our 165th ASOS in the Brunswick area is a group of officer and enlisted joint tactical air controllers. These are the guys that run around on the ground with special ops units and then call in airstrikes. That unit has received over 20 Bronze Stars in the last 4.5 years, and that's for a unit of only 40 officers and airmen. So true American heroes down in that unit. And then the only other thing that I would mention by way of ops tempo, to fill in for a question that was asked of General Nesbitt about concerns about if other basing closes, something that might be worth keeping an eye on. I know that you all are very familiar with our state partnership with the Republic of Georgia. That expands well beyond just a military-to-military relationship. But the Republic of Georgia may become key because they have some great airfields there, and if it reaches a point where we need to prosecute war on terror in Afghanistan and other basing options are denied to us, that would be an option. I'll guarantee you the Russians won't like that much, so that will certainly be worth watching as we go forward. To give you a flavor for just how well your Air National Guard is doing, within the last 2 years, of 7 eligible units in the state, five have received Air Force Outstanding Unit Awards. That's unprecedented in anybody's memory around the country. So your Air National Guard in Georgia is absolutely top-notch. Real quick snapshot on future roadmap, and then I'll be finished. When we try and look ahead, General Nesbitt is all about strategic planning and joint planning. And as we try to sit down and look forward for the next 10 or 15 years to see where our Air National Guard needs to go, these are some of the emerging things that we see. The first is, I think that we need to grow in the greater Atlanta area. This is the best recruiting base by far in the state, and it's a high-tech recruiting base. When you look at GTRI, Georgia Tech, Emory, the other technical institutes that we have around the city, this is where we should be doing the bulk of our recruiting, and it would help if we had a larger air presence in the greater Atlanta area. I also think that it's important for us to look at the possibility of getting a foothold in the Moody area. I mentioned where we're located geographically. In south central Georgia, we have no air presence, and I would like to see us have at least a small presence down at Moody Air Force Base, and in fact, I'm planning a trip down there in the next couple of weeks to flesh out the possibilities for that. In terms of a center of excellence that I think provides a real growth opportunity, the Townsend Range air-to-ground bombing complex in association with the Combat Readiness Training Center, I think offers some real opportunities for us. If you haven't had a chance to go down for our biannual turkey shoot, I would strongly recommend that you do. It is a hoot to go down there and watch fighter aircraft up close, strafing and doing their bomb runs while being controlled down on the range. The range is very small, but it's growing exponentially. We're in concert with the Marine Corps, who are buying 40,000 acres down there, which will give us a much greater footprint to be able to do tactical bombing down there. In addition, we're on the back end of a 10-year effort to create a coastal MOA airspace so that our fighter and bomber aircraft now can go out over the water where we have very, very large whiskey warning area training ranges, fight their air-to-air battle, and then transit that coastal MOA and then come straight onto the bombing range in order to do their air-to-ground strike. That is unprecedented for the East Coast, and for all of our flying units on the East Coast that don't want to have to fly or deploy all the way out to the West Coast to get to the large ranges out there, the Townsend Range Complex probably represents the best training opportunity east of the Mississippi River. And I can see real opportunities for us to jointly develop training opportunities there. I mentioned that we have a blended wing at the JSTARS wing. It's comprised of approximately 50% active duty and 50% National Guard. We've just instituted a recommendation that we change the mix of our C-130 unit to also be reflective of an active duty presence. We've invited the active duty to join with us down there, send us a squadron of their folks, because we see as a wave of the future that joining up with the active duty is really the only way that we're going to stay in the flying business. We are not going to have as a nation nearly as many airframes to fly 15 or 20 years from now as we have right now, and I think that the only way forward is for the Guard and the active duty and the reserve to share those dwindling numbers of airframes. I will ask you, in advance for where you can help in exchange for recommending that an active duty squadron comes and joins us. We would like to grow that unit from 8 aircraft to 12 aircraft, because with a whole active duty squadron we would need more airframes, and we would certainly like to trade our old H models in for C-130Js. That would be good for the Air National Guard and good for our Lockheed corporate brothers that are right down the road. I mentioned that we would like to get C-130Js if we could for the Savannah unit. The other thing that I think we need to keep an eye on is whether or not we need to look long-term for a flying replacement mission for JSTARS. It's anybody's guess about how long the viability of that airplane will be. And the votes are all over the map. It is indispensable, I will tell you, for the war on terror right now. It is in very, very high demand in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I don't see its mission going away anytime soon. But as we look at miniaturization and evolving technology, whether or not it would be possible to do the bulk of the intelligence and surveillance gathering effort from space in the out years or not, I don't know. And so we are concerned in terms of a long-term view about whether or not the JSTARS aircraft as a platform is something that we will need as a nation 20 or 30 years from now. And if we don't, then it probably will be time, sometime in the next decade, to look about evolving into another flying airplane opportunity down there for that wing of heroes. Sir, unless you wanted me to address anything else, General Ness, but that concludes my remarks for the Air National Guard.
Do you use the Raptor, or is that for active duty? We put in a urging resolution that production continue on that, and I don't know, do you use that, or is that active duty?
Chairman Yates, do you have any idea how much it kills me to be in an office up at Dobbins and watching those F-22s flying? That is one heck of an airplane. And as of right now, we do not have any fighter units in Georgia. We only have the C-130s and the J-Stars aircraft. I'm an F-15 fighter pilot by trade. I came to Georgia to fly F-15s at Dobbins, and in the mid-1990s is when we left the fighter business. From a personal standpoint, from a selfish standpoint, I'd do anything to get fighters back in Georgia. From a realistic standpoint, we have really big concerns about whether that's where the National Guard needs to be if we take the long view, because there are going to be so few fighters. To answer your question specifically, there are Air Force Reserve units that are sharing the F-22 with the active duty or in other units around the country, and we also have Air National Guard units that, one right now at Langley that shares the F-22 with active duty, with several more slated. The problem is there's only 183 F-22s being produced, possibly another 20 bridge aircraft, and then a gap between what the Air Force desperately needs and what the country can afford. I don't know what the ultimate answer to that will be, other than to tell you that I am very, very concerned as a citizen about staffing our country only to fight the war that we're involved in right now. I understand Secretary Gates' urgent need to increase UAV profile and to increase our air participation and presence in this current war. But your Air Force generals in the Guard and the active duty are paid to think a little further forward than that. And I would be very, very concerned about how we would meet a potential threat or adversary 20 or 30 years from now with just the few airplanes that are planned for right now. My favorite statistic is, if we build 183 F-22s, that's a total build-out that's planned right now, we will have more flyable P-51s in the United States than F-22s.
We passed one other bill in the House that should help, I think, and that is that military personnel won't have to be penalized by the fact that they're out-of-state tuition and so forth, and I hope that goes all the way through. They help a lot of military families.
That would be terrific, sir.
Yeah.
You know, anything that this committee and this legislature can do to help the long-term recruiting and retention of National Guardsmen is something worth serious concern. And I would caution all of us to be careful about looking at our retention and our recruiting statistics right now. Maria is going to have a great news story as well. In fact, her story is way better than mine. We stole and copied from some of the Army's recruiting techniques in order to build up our numbers. But at the risk of patting ourselves on the back too much, an awfully lot of the recruiting and retention data that looks positive for us, I think, is a direct result of the economy right now. And we've seen this over and over and over again. In a down economy, business is up for the military. Wherever we turn down, when we go back up again, and especially if the economy comes roaring back on a rocket ship, I know nobody sees that right now, but several years from now, when we start to turn that corner, then recruiting and retention will be a concern for us again. And so the sorts of things that we can do with things like retirement enticements and especially education enticements in order to attract and keep our soldiers and airmen, I think, is a very worthwhile endeavor.
I had one other connection with the National Guard. When we went into the line at St. Lo, the division that was right across the river was the 30th Infantry, which is Georgia National Guard at that time.
Yes, sir.
And they had, and talk about a turkey shoot, I was fortunate enough to be there when they had the 3,000 plane raid that opened up the front lines, and we went through and thought the war would be over shortly after we closed the Felice Gap there, but it was a real turkey shoot when you see that many planes and they look like they're going to all hit on top of you as they went over you, the bombs. And unfortunately they killed General McNair and one of the bombs went short there. But And I saw a lot of turkey shoots at the front lines this before P-47s strafing the front lines right in front of us, you know. So it's very interesting what you do, I'm sure of that.
Well, some of those fratricide incidents that occurred at that time was much to General Doolittle's dismay, and over arguments about the appropriateness of high-altitude bombers to be used in close contact with the ground troops. You look at the numbers that were involved in your war, and it is absolutely mind-boggling to my generation. I can't even conceive of the numbers of airmen and soldiers and aircraft that were required in order to do that. And yet, if we're going to learn anything from history, it ought to be patently clear to us that we can't fight a worldwide war with 183 aircraft. I don't care how great they are. They can't be in 2 or 3 or 4 places at the same time.
Well, because I learned something about when you say friendly fire, if you don't have a little friendly fire, you're not going to kill the people at the front lines that you want to, because artillery is volatile and so is bombs, you know, that they don't always go exactly where you want them. But if you get too far away, you're ineffective, you know. Is there any question from any member of the group? Let's recognize one of our members, Representative Hextall.
No, I have to correct you, Mr. Chairman. The Honorable Representative Hextall.
The Honorable?
Thank you, sir. Monsignor Honorable Representative Hextall.
Whatever you say.
May I ask a question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
First of all, thank you very, very much. And let me just say I apologize to the committee and those in attendance for being late. I think, first of all, I want to thank you very much. I want to go on record, and I want to apologize to the entire military. I was a product of the 60s, of course, and I had a different concept of what, you know, service should be. And, of course, I was on the other side, you know, and if I can just say colorfully, you know, like the Jane Fonda side, and we'll leave it like that. But I certainly have an appreciation by being on this committee since I've been here. I've learned so much about what you guys and the sacrifices that your families have made, and how much it means for us to support you. One of the things I heard you say is that we're providing various incentives to recruit people and have a better retention rate. I don't know what we can do, and I don't know if you would agree or disagree, but I'm going to ask this question. Maybe it's not a fair one. If it's not, tell me. Do you think we need to really consider at some point, and to number one, I heard 2 things. To number one, to get our staff up to par, or get our military up to par. Do you think we need to consider the draft? Question number 1. And number 2, I heard you say that we had X number of planes, and 20 or 30 years from now we won't be in a position perhaps to defend ourselves as strongly as we should be able to.
Yes, sir.
I also know that technology changes very rapidly. What we're talking about today in 09, technology, let's say in 029 will probably be completely different. So I guess the 2 questions: number 1, draft; number 2, technology; and number 3, do you think that we could do anything else to add to the incentive to hitchhike on what my chairman said?
With respect to the draft, I have my own personal opinion, which I'll share with you just briefly, which is I think that there is an advantage to having a draft if it's done correctly, because what it would do then is ensure a stratum of society serving rather than just a specific segment, and I think that there is value added in that. Our senior leadership in the country will tell you, though, that the way we have been doing it with an all-volunteer force is the more efficient approach, because the problem with the draft is that you have such enormous upfront costs to train an airman or a soldier. And if you're running a draft like we've had historically, where we'll bring soldiers in for 18 months or 24 months and then they return back out again, while you have the value maybe to society of their military experience, the military doesn't really leverage that experience because they invest that amount of money up front and then they lose that soldier in a very quickly. So the RAND studies and the other intellectual studies that I have read point to the more efficient way is to try and do it through an all-volunteer standpoint. From a technology standpoint, I think you raise a great question. And I have to remind myself as well that when I start to fret about the lack of fighters that this country will possess, for example, or the lack of bombers in 15 or 20 years based on our current projections, need to be reminded that in this joint world, and General Nesbitt has done a terrific job of helping me to think more jointly at the state level as well. What we need to be talking about as a country is effects and capabilities and not specific platforms. And so if you look 20 or 30 years downstream, well, maybe we don't need so many fighters, because if we can do the same thing that fighters do today with something else, then those are the trade-offs that very smart people are going to have to make. And then with respect to what you all can do within the state of Georgia, I'll defer to General Nesbitt and to Mr. Fowler for any specific recommendations. Our leadership in Georgia is very, very much appreciates the relationship that we have with you all, and all of us, want to work within the context of a single voice to try and push for the same sorts of things that we see would benefit the overall National Guard and the overall state.
Mr. Chairman, if I could might suggest if we could go through and hear from each one of these
All right.
folks here, and then maybe we could have a Q&A session.
Have the questions afterwards? All right. Thank you, sir. All right. Thank you, sir. I'll get that one out.
Good morning. I'm Brigadier General Maria Britt. I'm the commander of the Georgia Army National Guard. And I don't have any Civil War descendants. I'm a product of Italian immigrants. My both sets of grandparents came over in the 1920s, and part of that was they saw the storm rising on the horizon, and they had young sons too that they were looking out for. But my grandparents on my mom's side are Sicilian, and on my dad's side from Naples, so it's quite a mix there of Italian blood. My husband reminds me of that every time we have a fight, so just try to keep the temper down. I'm one of the first women that went through the United States Military Academy. I was in the 4th class of women that graduated in 1983. And I also have 3 daughters and a husband that's full-time in the National Guard. He's a colonel. In fact, he's deployed right now in Afghanistan with the 33rd out of Illinois. And so I'm also getting to understand the family role and being the single mom. We have an 11-year-old that's still at home, plus I'm in charge of his 82-year-old mother that's been living with us for 7 years. So I get to feel the effects of the family front as well as the military side as I continue to provide leadership in the state of Georgia. My background is primarily military police. I did that for 16 years and then switched over to military intelligence. And of course, as a general, we're generalists, so I don't really claim a branch anymore, but that was my background. I had various commands throughout my 26-year career, which led me to this point. And so what I'd like to do now is just kind of transition into what the Army National Guard is doing for you here in the state of Georgia as well as abroad, and give you a little bit more perspective on the different missions of our units, as General Hammond did for the Air Guard. Our overall mission is to provide trained and motivated forces to both the governor and to combatant commanders, and that's for homeland defense as well as the expeditionary warfight. And we do understand that this is going to be a consistent, persistent conflict where we will be fighting for many more years. The strength in the Army Guard has done very well over the last 4 years. In fact, for the last 6 years, we've shown steady growth. And although the economy has had something to do with that, I'd also like to think that we're a quality organization that people want to be a part of and have stayed. So our retention has been doing well also. We're about 10% over our force structure and strength. And that allows us to have better readiness when the units go out the door, because as you know, we often have to cross level, not just within the state, but throughout the nation with other National Guard units when we get called up for a brigade-size element. But this time, we've only had to go to one other state, and that was really directed from Guard Bureau for a battalion-size element. So now when the 48th Brigade deploys, it will be 95% Georgia Guardsmen as a part of that unit. And that is a success story. The other thing that allows us to do is target recruiting. So now we can target quality and only bring in the best of the best, and then we can put them in positions that actually need to be filled instead of double or triple stacking positions for supply clerks or admin clerks, that sort of thing. So it allows us to be more selective in filling the right positions with the best quality soldiers that we can get. We do have 5 major commands in the Georgia Army National Guard, and they all have various capabilities. We're also strategically based throughout the state of Georgia, and that was on purpose. And that took a lot of pain as we went through that transformation, but it was well worth it. The first brigade I want to talk about is a new brigade. We just stood it up this past year. It's the 560th Battlefield Surveillance Brigade. It's primarily an ISR brigade-size element, which is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. It's made up of military intelligence and the old LURS company that many of you used to know. Now it's the 3rd of the 108th RISTA, which is reconnaissance, surveillance, and target acquisition. Still doing a similar mission, but it's couched under this Battlefield Surveillance Brigade. The eyes and the ears, the commander in theater. The next brigade is the 648th Maneuver Enhancement Brigade, and this has become our Consequence Management Brigade here in the state of Georgia. It has the SURF-P that many of you are familiar with, which is part of the CST underneath it, Civil Support Team, small unit, goes around looking for toxic elements, detection, can do recon, decon. The SURF-P is the bigger brigade-size element that now encompasses field artillery units, engineers, military police. So we've housed them all now in one brigade. And the SURF-P, of course, you know, is our, it's the chemical, high explosive, radiological, nuclear, biological. It's a Soberni brigade battalion. All right, so they're going to be housed in Columbus with a unit up in Cumming. So we're going to spread them out throughout the state. We also have a 78 Troop Command that oversees our training regiments, our regional support groups, some medical. It's a different grouping, also a combat support battalion that's due up to rotate back to Iraq. And then we have an Aviation Troop Command that houses all of our rotary and fixed-wing aircraft. And our last brigade is the 48th Infantry Brigade, which you're most familiar with because of their various deployments. We talk about the 48th often, but like with General Hammond, we also have other units that are deployed. Right now we have engineers, MPs, embedded training teams, up to about 500 soldiers that are currently deployed. And we also support our warrior training units and our Operation Warrior Trainer throughout the nation. In addition to the 48th Brigade deploying this year, which will be about 2,800 soldiers, we have another 1,000 soldiers that we're going to be helping out the door to support the global war, both in Iraq and Afghanistan. And those will also include engineers, military police, medical, public affairs, and other additional embedded training teams. The 48th Brigade, let me talk a little bit about their mission. If you were at the legislative dinner that we had just recently, General Dudney was introduced. He's going to be the commander of our JTF Phoenix that will oversee, the 40th Brigade will be a force provider to the JTF Phoenix, Joint Task Force Phoenix. So their mission is going to be primarily mentoring. So they're going to be mentoring the Afghan Army as well as the police force in Afghanistan. So it's not so much the counterinsurgency mission that they had in Iraq, but now we're shifting over to the mentoring training mission that they're so well suited for. They've already started leaving. We had over 600 soldiers go to Camp Shelby. That's going to be their MOB station. So we've got 600 there, and they'll be mobed in at various mobilization dates throughout the next 3 months. And the 108th was first foot will be next, and then second foot will follow. And then the rest of the brigade is going to go to Camp Atterbury in Indiana, where they will train up on the Joint Task Force Phoenix mission. So we've got task forces going to Shelby, and we've got the Phoenix headquarters going to Atterbury. There will be local send-offs because of this phased deployment. There won't be just one send-off like we had 4 years ago, unfortunately. It's going to be a little bit more piecemeal, but it's going to be at the local level, and we are going to get the invitations out as those occur, and as we know when they occur, because our timeline still tends to shift by a day or so depending on when we can get aircraft to get our soldiers out. There will also be a VIP day at Camp Atterbury, and that's going to be the first week in June. So as soon as we can get a firm date on that, we'll let you know and invite each of you to come out for that. That's a great event where they showcase the mentoring mission and the reconstruction mission, and you also get to see the soldiers that are out there. That'll probably be the last week that the JTF Phoenix is at Camp Atterbury before they head out. All right. I would like to also thank you for your support and everything that you've done for the Army National Guard and the Georgia Department of Defense. We're one team, and it's just refreshing time and again to know that you're here for us and you support us and want to come out and visit the troops and be a part of our organization's success. So please continue doing that. I'm not going to ask for anything specific. Mike Fowler and General Nesbitt do a great job of relaying what our needs are in the Guard, but we do appreciate everything that you do, and we know it's heartfelt. Thank you. Did you want me to take any specific questions or just? Okay. All right. I'll be followed by Brigadier General Jerry Bradford. He's our commander of the State Defense Force. Jerry.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, hello, how are you? You'll probably tell from my accent that I am definitely a Southern boy. While I could talk as long probably as no, sir, I don't even talk about the War of Northern Aggression. I could probably talk as long as General Hammond here, but I only about half of it said.
I heard Sherman wasn't too bad. He's just a little careless with matches.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I have the honor and privilege of commanding the Georgia State Defense Force. We are an all-volunteer arm. Actually, we're all volunteers, but we are the only all-volunteer arm of the Georgia Department of Defense who's not paid. I have the pleasure to command.
Like legislators.
Yes, sir. Very much so. I have the privilege to command right now a little over 650 of Georgia's finest who volunteer in a number of areas around the state. We have 3 major units, 2 of them headquartered in Atlanta, 1 down in the Macon area. And within the Georgia State Defense Force, we have the capabilities ranging all the way from doctors, nurses, attorneys, engineers, welders, plumbers, linguists, scuba divers, you name it, we run the gamut. And before you leave, Mr. Vice Chairman, I just want to tell you we are all volunteer. Okay, I've got a slot for you. We're like I say, we're 650 plus strong, and fully a third of our membership are prior service, and half of that are retired members like myself. But the rest of those people have never served a day in a real military unit, but they find the regimen of a military atmosphere to be the place they like to serve. And we provide that guidance for them. Now, we have 3 primary missions. Primary mission number 1, of course, is to support to the Army and the Air National Guard. They call us. We provide that quick reaction force because we aren't bound by some of the legislative issues that bog them down in getting their people to on site. So we can be there first and hold the fort for that first 72 hours until the Army and Air Guard can get there. We also provide direct support to and defense support to civil authority when called. This is all coordinated at the Joint Operations Center for the state, and we can go into a multitude of areas. In fact, you may have heard some of the comments about our medical team in response to the Katrina operation. We've received a number of laudatory remarks for our support to the evacuation out at Dobbins Air Base. The last mission we have, of course, would be in time of a cataclysmic emergency within the state of Georgia. We would provide that cadre of personnel who would take over command, organization, and direction of the assumed plethora of volunteers who would come out of the woodwork who would want to support, would be untrained and unorganized. That would be our job. As I mentioned while you were out of the room, Mr. Vice Chairman, we are all volunteer force. And 1/3 of our people are prior service, military, Army, Navy, Air Force, and 1 or 2 Marines. And like I say, we have a slot for you. Anytime you'd like to come down, we bring you in at your prior rank. And
is he looking for a job?
No. Hey, we're not looking to pay him either.
Nothing will change then.
Anyway, that is the Georgia State Defense Force in a nutshell. And subject to your questions, I'm finished.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'll be followed by General Ross.
Pull this microphone down from Stretch there so I can get to it. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, It is truly an honor for us to be here today. Thank you so much for having us come in and talk with you. My background, my very, very brief thumbnail sketch, had a couple of great cousins, kind of back to the Scotty Hammond story, that fought in the War of Northern Aggression. They were part of the aggressor force, though, I'm afraid to say. Sorry, Senator Douglas. This is full disclosure, okay? I got one buried at Antietam and one at Manassas. The family member I'm most proud of is my dad. He was a career Marine, fought in the islands for 4 years during World War II and also in Korea. And I kind of followed in his footsteps a little bit. I joined the Marine Corps Reserve right out of college. Spent 6 years in there, got my commission in the Florida National Guard. I was living in Fort Lauderdale at the time, working for Southern Bell. And came to Atlanta in 1979. I was telling Commissioner Wheeler that I've been in Atlanta in Georgia for 30 years now, and he says I am now authorized eating grits. So that's a distinction I have not heard before. So I hope the 30 years does authorize me some of that. My background is infantry, light infantry, wheeled infantry, Mr. Vice Chairman, and mechanized infantry in the 48th Brigade Combat Team. I want to talk a little bit about that background here in a second as I talk about the mission of the Joint Staff and Joint Task Force Georgia. As I think about, and General Nesbitt mentioned, that we are a unique military organization in the National Guard. We have two missions, two stated specified missions. We have two commanders-in-chief. The governor is our commander-in-chief for whatever he needs us for our what we call Defense Support to Civil Authority mission. And then, of course, when we're activated on Title 10 from Title 32, we go to the warfight mission and we work for the President of the United States. We've been doing Defense Support to Civil Authorities since there's been a Guard. I go back to the mid-'80s when I remember deploying my infantry company at least 3 or 4 times to the streets of Atlanta to keep people separated that didn't like each other very much. Kind of a forerunner of some of the missions we have now, but it's kind of descriptive of the fact that it doesn't matter what the governor needs us for. We have trained and ready soldiers and airmen and State Defense Force members that are flexible and can do just about doggone anything that needs to be done. And let me fast forward from the mid-'80s to now, particularly since 9/11, as we understand that there are folks out there that want to do us harm here, and we also understand that there are natural threats to the citizens and the property of our state and region and country. In the spirit of continuous improvement, which is one of the values of the Georgia National Guard, we continually morph the structure of our business to create a better approach to how we do support to our civil authorities. We have now and have had for a couple of years a 24/7 Joint Operations Center up at Dobbins. That Joint Operations Center stays in constant contact with the State Operations Center that Director English runs down on Confederate Avenue. The interface that we have now and the relationships that we have been able to build over the years with civil authorities, read that local, state, and federal civil authorities that might need our services, is unsurpassed and growing. And where we have come now under General Nesbitt's leadership in the joint arena, and Scotty Hammond mentioned the joint arena and how we've all learned that we have capabilities in the Air Guard and the Army Guard, and as you know, Mr. Vice Chairman and Mr. Chairman, you get stovepiped. You start thinking green when you're in the Army and blue when you're in the Air Force. We're what we call purple now. You merge it all together and you create the capability, you find the capability that you need to get the job done and get the mission done. So I have a joint staff. It's a small staff. The larger staffs belong to General Britt and General Hammond particularly in his wings, which is where most of the work is done. I have a small staff that plans and prepares operations and support and synchronization for our Defense Support Civil Authorities missions. If we And what we're doing right now, as we speak up at Dobbins, we have our staff, along with some of the Army and the Air Guard staff and State Defense Force staff, working on what does that structure look like when we have a full-scale deployment for, you name it, whatever event might occur out there, whether it's a man-made or a natural event, a la hurricane, earthquake, explosives, it doesn't matter. We're prepared for it. A couple of units I wanted to mention that belong to General Britt and General Hammond and that we overwatch in our joint staff, the civil support team. I think you probably know about our civil support team. 22 highly educated, highly trained airmen and soldiers that are ready to respond to any CBRNE mission, any CBRNE event. CBRNE, chemical, biological, radiological. We'll kind of shortcut some of the others. They provide services to our local authorities on a weekly basis because we have some great equipment that has been funded since 9/11, great training, and they're there ready to go at a moment's notice. We ramped that up to a thing called the SURF-P, the CBRNE Emergency Response Force. That's part of one of General Britt's formations, and it also is joint. There are some medical folks from the 116th Airlift Wing in there. So again, and it's a response force on a higher level that deals with search and rescue, chemical decon, chemical and biological decon, and medical treatment. And then we also have a National Guard response force. And again, I'm just kind of throwing these terms out there in these organizations to let you know that we have some great capabilities ready to go at a moment's notice. As we need to respond to Director English and the Governor, when we have an event that requires one of those capabilities, and we are preparing and training all the time to create that larger organization. We call it the Adaptive Battle Staff. That has become the new mantra. Senator Douglas knows from his background, we always come up with new terms and acronyms in the Army so that we keep everybody off balance and they don't know what we're doing. But the Adaptive Battle Staff is that larger staff that we would flesh out from the Army and the Air Guard and the SDF in order to create the command and control element to be Joint Task Force Georgia. To give you a description of what that would look like, General Nesbitt was our first ever in the country, Title 10, Title 32 commander of a joint task force for the G8 summit at Sea Island. By the way, he's still getting renowned, and so is the Georgia Guard for that event. You can't hardly go to a conference about Defense Support Civil Authorities that you don't see the slide. I saw it yesterday, sir. The folks from Northcom put it up there again. Here's how the task force was organized in Georgia for the Sea Island Summit. And there's General Nesbitt. And he's got two colors. He's got 3 or 4 colors. He had Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, Army, Coast Guard, and then, of course, under that task force was Secret Service and FBI and everything else. That is the way, that was the precursor of all the structures that we're working on now throughout the nation to respond to any civil authority needed event. And it started here in Georgia, folks, and it's amazing to see how it has grown and become codified in the doctrine of our Army and Air Force, particularly now. Quick word about the SDF. Great Americans. I look at them as being the immediate response DISCA force. They don't have a warfight mission. Maria and Scotty have a warfight mission. They are training their folks to go to the warfight. That training provides them with the capabilities and skills to do anything we need to do in the DISCA arena. So if anybody ever says, well, why don't we just let the Guard do the Defense Support Civil Authorities mission and they don't need to do a warfight mission? Absolutely not. We get our skills and capabilities because we are full-fledged members of the military forces, and we can go as an operational force, as General Nesbitt said, to any event overseas that we need to, but that also provides us with the skills, training, and equipment and highly motivated soldiers and airmen that are capable of responding to anything that the Governor needs us for. Again, thank you very much for having us here. I tried to throw out just a couple of topics that you may want to talk about in further detail. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just wrap up, you see, Mike and I are known at the face of the guard here at the Capitol and out around with the general public, but you can see why we're so successful as an organization. We've got great leaders like these these representing our key leaders of our organization. But I can tell you the depth of leadership that we have in our Georgia Department of Defense is great. Each one of these have a team of absolutely great leaders working for them, and that is why that we are successful as we are. And as I mentioned, we are recruiting some of the greatest young people into the organization that I've ever seen. I'd like to, just speak for just a moment to the draft issue and maybe give you a little different perspective. You know, I was in the Army. I was drafted, in fact, into the Army, and was there and saw what the Army became at the final stages of the draft, and I would never want to go back there again. The Army became an organization that was wrought with drugs. It had all kinds of discipline problems. And we had a lot of people that were there that didn't want to be there, but you know, it reflected some of the ills of society that we had at the time as well. But I can tell you that the Army that we have today, the military, the Air Force, and Marines and Navy that we have today, are a much different organization than that Army was that was a draft era Army that Senator Douglas and I certainly remember. I think certainly the draft was there during World War II, but that was a different situation. You know, we mobilized the whole country then, and it was a different, certainly a different environment. But I can tell you, the all-volunteer military of today is the finest military, I think, that we've been able to assemble, and I would not want to see us go back the other direction. With that, if we can answer any more questions, we'd certainly be glad to do so.
Thank you, sir. Senator Douglas has a question.
Appreciate the rundown. Let me just make a couple of comments, and I'm going to have to leave here in just a second. We've been joined by my intern, who's a sophomore cadet at North Georgia. He's delighted to be in a room full of general officers, but he is doing a great job. He's an SMP cadet, I believe, as well, and so he has a bright future. Let me echo what you just said, General Nesbitt, about the draft versus what we have today. And when I went in the Army in '77, those of us that were coming in at that period and those that were in were tasked with basically cleaning up the Army and rebuilding the Army after Vietnam, and we did that. And by the early mid-'80s, you know, we had things squared away again, and today, and since then, and today, we've got the best Army and the best military that we've ever had. I'm convinced of that. So I'm not a fan of the draft either, because I've seen what it did at that point too. But certainly in a national emergency, we do what we had to do. But suffice it to say that the system we have right now is not broken. Particularly in Iraq and Afghanistan, our re-enlistment rates are far above what we even want them to be. The Army Guard here in Georgia is over and above your authorized strength, I believe, and there's a reason for that. It's because we're drawing a great caliber of young folks, and there is a among a large segment of the population there is a desire to serve, and so we're drawing on that, and so we appreciate the leadership though that makes that possible. The non-commissioned officer corps. That has direct supervision over our young soldiers and the young officers as well. As we all know, in all the branches of the military, it's not generals and politicians that fight wars. It's captains, lieutenants, sergeants, and privates, and airmen and sailors and Marines that fight wars. So we depend on them, and they're doing a great job. Let me also mention that I'm now a national co-chairman of National Conference of State Legislatures, a new military sustainability committee, along with a state senator from Texas. We're the co-chairs, and we've been tasked by the National Conference of State Legislatures to work on ways that the states can be more supportive and more aware of what's going on in their National Guards and their militaries and that sort of thing. So we met in Tucson at the end of January, and we're going to meet in D.C. in April and 2 other meetings after that around the country to work on that. So that is something that is ongoing. But this state has a track record that's so exceptional that we can, I can just take what we've done and tell them, and listen to them. And along those lines, you may or may not know that the governor will speak with, I guess, by telephone tomorrow, the Secretary of the Army. I don't think he's going to be here. And so they're rounding up, General Browning right now is rounding up all the great things we've done. So the governor will be able to share those with the Secretary of the Army tomorrow by telephone. So people are looking to us, and the leadership is looking to us. Obviously, a lot of the things that have been brought up here today are the responsibility of the national command structure, the civilian command structure in the country. In Washington, D.C., the F-22, whether that'll be built, and as much as we'd love to see it built, particularly with Lockheed here, that's a decision that'll be made in Washington and not here in Atlanta, unfortunately. So hopefully they'll make the right decision, and because it's an exceptional aircraft, obviously, and now the follow-on plane, the F-30 something another, F-35, is even more gee whiz. So we have a bad habit, those of us that are familiar with the military, we had a bad habit of trying to fight the last war when we go to the next war. The Air Force is not as bad about that because they have this high-tech stuff that, in the Army, we still have tanks like we had in World War I. A little more modern, obviously, but same basic structure. So, hopefully one of these days we can get away from that. But let me just say that I look forward to hopefully being able to go to Camp Atterbury and patting these guys and gals on the back, and visiting with our airmen and that sort of thing, and all of them, and because they appreciate seeing us, those of us that are wearing stars and those of us that are wearing civilian clothes. They appreciate the recognition and the fact that we would take time out of our schedules to come out and just talk to them, and it means a lot to them. We are having a departure ceremony in Covington on the 27th of March on the square in Covington, and I know they had one in Canton or Cherokee County last weekend, I believe, or weekend before last. So they are starting to happen around the state as we say goodbye. But once these guys are gone, too, it's on us here in the General Assembly and on the people out in the communities to continue to support the families, because the families go through, in some respects, a more difficult time than the soldiers and the airmen do, because the families don't know what's going on. We're tough guys, and we always say, "Don't worry, I'm okay. How are you? Oh, I'm okay. Don't worry, don't worry." And you're over there, bullets are going zing, zing, zing all over your head, and don't worry, I'm okay. Well, our wives and our husbands and our parents are smarter than that. They know when you say "don't worry," that's like red flags go up, and they know. So it's something that we have to do to take care of the families while they're back here, and while our soldiers and airmen are gone. So certainly, if there's anything the Senate can do, and I know the House as well, but me speaking for the Senate committee, if there's anything we can do, not to hesitate to call on us, any of you. And we certainly appreciate the hard work that all of you all put into what you do, and even our unpaid state defense force. If we could get everybody else to work for free, we'd have our budget done. But let me just suffice it to say, for my side of the Capitol, we certainly appreciate everything.
Thank you for being here, Senator. Sister's got a question here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for the wonderful presentation, General Hammond, General Britt, General Ross, General Nesbitt, General Bradford, all of you. As you were talking, Recon, Decon, my first MOS was 19 Delta Recon. CSC, Combat Support Unit, 11 Bravo, Mechanized, Straight Leg, 76 Whiskey, 76 Papa Material Accounting Specialist. Back to General Hammond, you made a comment that really stuck out in my mind. I believe in peace through superior firepower. I'm of the mindset that you don't wait till the battle has begun to build the equipment and get the material you need. You need it prior to that. And I'm really concerned about what I have seen here in the last couple of weeks with the direction we are taking as far as our defense forces in this country. I'm of the opinion that now is not the time to reduce spending for our defense, for the brave men and women who are standing in harm's way. So whatever you all can do from your level, and using your chain of command, to impress upon them the importance of that fighter plane in Lockheed, forbid and forbidden something drastic or catastrophic would take place on this nation again. I don't want it to ever be said that we were ill prepared because we didn't have the equipment and the necessary machines, tools to respond in the appropriate manner. I think you'll understand where I'm going. My question is, this morning it rocked me again on the 5th page of the New York Times. On the bottom section of that, and I don't know why it was not placed on the front section. 5 of the detainees at Guantanamo Bay praised their participation in the attack on this nation in 9/11. The same base or the same facility now that we are considering to close and release this element back into the population. I'm concerned with that, and I know your intelligence and ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and recon on the state level is going to do whatever it takes to make sure those individuals do not re-enter into the population to cause this nation further harm. So I just want to thank y'all once again. I just wanted to put that out there. I am really concerned about some things that are taking place when it comes to the national defense of this nation and all the young people that are putting their lives and at risk and on the line for the freedoms and liberties we enjoy. So whatever you all can do to ensure that we stay the course to defeat this enemy in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so we're about to draw down in Iraq, and I noticed that the suicide bombers are increasing in Iraq now because we made it public that we're reducing our forces. So be vigilant. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Representative Sextall has a question.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor, but I want to just say that, and let me just preface what I'm saying.
Thank you. Good to see you.
If I was a torch, there would be no question I'm a flaming liberal. And I want to just say that I have to echo, and I'm almost ashamed because we're being recorded, to say I have to agree with the young man. When I saw that we were going to release these folk, and possibly, I don't know where they're going to go, and I'm not military oriented, so I don't know. I didn't go to the military. But it scares me, and I hate that you and I disagree. I mean, you and I agree. It's scary that you and I have to agree on that. And my president, I love him, and I voted for him, I support him, I don't care what you are politically, but that scares the hell out of me. And if it scares me as a flaming liberal, you can imagine what people that are in your position must feel. They said stop waterboarding. I don't know. But our country has been safe for 7 years. We did something right. And I told some people in the group, and I was almost run out of the group. I said, I don't give a, anyway, but fill in your blanks. I would have put on your uniform in 2001. And in the 60s, I was, I told you, I was a Jane Fonda kind of guy in college. But when it comes to defense of this country, whatever we have to do, you got my support. I have grandkids now. My philosophy is a little different. I understand what it takes to make things happen. And I agree with you, man. And you and I don't agree on much. We and I have a wonderful relationship. But whatever it takes to keep this country safe, I pray that you will continue to do that. And you will have my thorough support on that. Because it angers me that you're going to let these idiots out? And knowing what we go through and the sacrifice we made, and you're right. In Afghanistan, whatever it takes to win. They ran the British out. They obviously ran the Russians out. But I'd be doggone if they were going to let them win over there as a result of what they did. And you have my total liberal support on that. Secondly, and I want to say not to belabor this point, one of the things I want to do is I want to thank, I've been on this committee now 14 years. I want to thank, and I'm not being disrespectful to him, I want to thank the female general. And let me tell you why. We had hearings, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if you were on the committee at the time. I'm sure you were. We had hearings probably, in the mid-'90s in subcommittees about what females went through in the military. And I can imagine it wasn't easy as a minority. I want to thank you for sticking with it, and I want to thank you for being brave and vigilant like you have and stuck with it. Thank you very much. I'm not singling you out. I'm not trying to embarrass you. But I heard some of the horror stories at that time. One of the things I'll ask that maybe we would consider, I still have terms that bother me, and I guess it's just me, and I know that we've been fighting for equality in terms of gender equality in this body for many years. When I hear terms like airman, when I hear terms like guardsman, it still bothers me. Perhaps it doesn't bother anybody else. But I don't know why we can't use terms like air personnel, guard personnel, because we've changed things, and Senator can agree, and I don't know, Senator and I, we don't agree on a lot of things, I'm sure. But I'm better looking than he is and older than he is, so it doesn't matter. But I certainly would look at it that in your following through and trying to, again, build gender equality in our military, because our women serve just as diligently and vigilant as a result of what I've heard from this young lady here as anyone. And if we can kind of take away that inequity, I don't know if it's possible. I'm sure it is. But stop, it's always men, guardsmen, airmen. We're always talking about men. But we have some doggone fine women in our military, too. Thank you for what you do. Thank God for you, and thank God for America. And I'm still a flaming liberal. But you understand, I really, really appreciate having served up here 14 years and have a different perspective of what you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Representative. They made a little movie about me up at the National Museum of Patriotism. I don't know whether any of you have seen it or not, but and they brought in a little bit about my grandfather, who was in the Civil War, and he was in Fayette County. He was in Fayette County. Went over to Griffin to join an artillery outfit, and I made a comment what he couldn't have done with my airplane up there, But we're not picking sides now. I love the Yankees and the Southerners and all of them together. It takes all of us to fight the enemy that's out there. I want to ask General Britt a question. I heard a story that her colonel husband was up for general, but he wanted to go over and do his part in the war. Is that a true statement?
Yes, sir. He wanted to deploy first to get that experience and help him further down the road. So he is, and when he gets back, really for the first availability. So I don't know. It's bad enough with a colonel and general in the house. General Douglas.
Don't help his ego, please. Well, I admire anybody that volunteers. I heard about the guy that volunteered, and he had to clean the latrine, I think, but in the Army. But I admire you for that, and it's very admirable. I think that and we got people like that in the Army, I'm sure, and that has made it great over all the years, and I admire you very much for that taking place because it's so important. I have never had a meeting, I don't think, that where I enjoyed it more or got more out of it, and I hope we haven't burdened you all down with too much time here. We ended up at about an hour and a half, and that's not too long to hear from practically everybody in the military here that's doing the job and running the show. And as I say, we had the Veterans Affairs over here and did the same thing with them. And I think it gives us a great opportunity to have the facts so that we can go forward and support all you folks every way we can. Of course, our realm here is, the state's got one place and the Fed's got another. And we can do our part to try to educate them. And like I say, we sent this resolution up, urgent resolution, and we've done that from time to time to let them know what's on our mind and how we support them. And I was glad, as I say, I was glad to see that thing on the out-of-state tuition thing, because that's one that never, it was a shame it was ever in there. And because I know we go through that thing of soldiers just deciding what is their state and their home state, and the taxes sometimes are kind of unfair, and it's not meant to be, but it just kind of falls through the cracks. But you have our support at all times, and you know where we live, and you know how to get in touch with us, and we just appreciate you so much, and urge you to call on us anytime we can be of any help. And is there any final statement anybody wants to make? Or?
Let me just say thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. You know, we are an apolitical organization. We certainly accept support of the liberals just as much as we do from conservatives. But we are, as Vice Chairman indicated, we are certainly making our needs known, and we continue to do that to this committee and to the Senate. We do it nationally too. In fact, we were just up in Washington last week to talk with all of our congressional delegation but one, and let them know what our needs are, and we do that on a routine basis. You know, the young Americans that make up our organization will do whatever it takes to defend this nation. They'll pay in blood if they have to. I'd much rather see us pay in our national treasure to provide them the tools that they need so that they don't have to pay in blood. And you know, modern aircraft, modern weapon systems are a part of that. I know that our national leadership, just like you do here in the state legislature, will have to make some very tough choices in terms of how we spend that national treasure. And our economy is in very tough shape right now, and it looks like it'll be that way for years to come. And we know that we in the military will have to tighten our belts just like everybody else in this country. But we do certainly, along with our national leadership in the military, make known what we need, and then it's up to that. It's out of our hands. Decisions will be made by our president and by our folks in Congress, and we'll take whatever resources we are provided, and we'll use them to defend this nation. You can count on that. And our greatest strength is those great young Americans that are joining our ranks every day. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to them, and thank you again for support.
Thank you, sir, very much. I'll just say one thing before I go. I've learned a lot here, and some of it I'm not so sure about. One statement by my seatmate who sits right back of me, and all this time I didn't know he's a flaming liberal. I'm going to have to watch out for that fire back of me. I thought we were getting along real good, but you live and learn, don't you?
To ease that, I'm a staunch conservative, so.
Yeah, it's all balanced off. With that, the meeting is adjourned.
Are the mics off, Mr. Chairman?